Yan. Good morning, bro. Kamusta?
Good morning, pasensya na pinulit na naman kita.
No problem at all, bro. Next time, bawi ka na lang. No, first of all, let me apologize for not being in the right zone. Hindi pa ano yung pawis natin. I said we have to go before your day starts and it gets too late.
Ano ba workout mo ngayon?
I just do basic calisthenics pag ganun sa gabi. Yun yung mga
Nag-uunat-unat ka na.
Yeah. It's just burning. Nag-guilty ako sa second carbs ko today. Usually one carbs lang ako a day.
Okay.
Zadi na tayo. Hindi na katulad dati. 3 carbs, extra rice. Go pa rin the next day.
Tumatanda.
Second carbs, guilty na yung parang ang bigat mo na, bro. Bro, wow. How is there? Good morning, America. Kamusta naman dyan, bro?
Bro, so mga a month ago, I decided na ayaw ko na makinig ng balita about US. Kasi akala ko normal US election lang. Madali lang, straightforward. Mababa yung popularity ng incumbent president, mataas yung inflation, hindi ganun kaganda yung ekonomiya. Tapos, in a way, na laos na yung mga issue na nagpasikat sa Democrats, like yung Inflation Reduction Act, yung lobby nila against abortion, parang iba-iba, bago ng issues yung mga pinag-uusapan ng mga tao. So, usually ganyan, pag midterm, ang sinasabi ng mga American analysts is gravity takes over, political gravity. Yeah. In other words, kung mahina yung presidente ng partido mo, you'll take what Barack Obama called was shellacking in the midterm. Yeah. So hindi ko na pinansin. Tapos paggising ko the day after the election, sabi ko, ano to? So Richard? Ano to?
Yeah, right. Good surprise. I mean, again, Uncle Joe defied all the critics. Remember back in 2020, he had an interview with the editorial board, I think, of New York Times. He said, "I'm not dead and I don't plan to die anytime soon," something like that. Because everyone keeps on counting him out, diba? Like 6 months ago, everyone was saying, wala naman napasa si Biden, and then last minute, yung environment infrastructure bill nakapasa. Now, everyone's thinking he'll get even worse shellacking because like Trump lost 40 seats, Obama 50 seats. I think Clinton, was it the first one? He lost 60 seats. So they were expecting like 70, 80 seats maybe, no? And yet, boom, I think he did best since JFK as first Democratic president.
And then the last time daw may midterm president who did this well was 2002. George W. Bush.
Right.
The height of his popularity.
Democratic president.
Pero in any president, pero yung 2002, naman, Richard, that was after 9/11. That was everybody was rallying towards the president. It was very difficult to be anti-Bush. There were anti-Bush people. I was anti-Bush at that time. But, it was very difficult, at least in the context of the United States, to be anti-Bush. So talagang exceptional itong election na to.
I don't think that counts, I think Reagan probably would put up a good competition there. I think it will Reagan level, no? As far as which is weird for a president with barely 40% approval rating, with inflation not being as bad in the latest numbers, but still bad enough. So he defied gravity. Once again, I mean, Uncle Joe came out of nowhere. Remember, even the presidential, yung first primaries niya, he had friends who were working for Buttigieg, New Hampshire, and like Biden got a shellacking there, like it was 4th or 3rd, whatever, and yet he keeps on doing this, right?
Ano ba tawag sa clarify lang natin para sa ano ba tawag sa mga viewers, mga kameta ba?
Kameta.
Clarify lang natin para sa mga kameta, no? Richard, why are we talking about Joe Biden? Kasi yung pangalan niya, technically wala naman sa balota, di ba? Pero yung rehistro sa media, panalo si Uncle Joe. So why is that our perspective?
Yeah. Let me put it this way now. Actually, I was thinking about it. This midterms was so different because you have an immediate former president very involved in this. I'm not talking about Obama, right? Who did, I think, quite good job. I think the best speeches of these midterms were Barack Obama, right? Not any of other candidates really on the ballot. But it's weird because, bro, usually the midterms is supposed to be a referendum on the incumbent president. But this became also a referendum on just the president that lost in 2020. So it was a double referendum. So mukhang lapas dito, di ba? Lele, I'm sure you agree with me, is that there was no wave, but there were like multiple whirlpools. No, and each state had its own dynamic. One whirlpool was about, culture wars, inflation, crime. So this is where the Republicans did well. And the other whirlpool was, do we want to be a democracy? abortion rights, Roe versus Wade, no? So I think that's what makes it very different, because Trump was kind of on the ballot too, right? So it's not by two guys, almost octogenarians who are on the ballot. So I think this makes it very special.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, no, because para lang din sa Pilipinas yung midterm. 'Di ba kasi sa midterm, 'di ba may nakaupo kang presidente, hindi siya up for re-election, pero magfi-field yan ng candidates sa Senado, 'di ba? Tapos yung Senado, kung maka 12-0 siya or maka-close siya to 12-0, 'di ba? Yun yung parang referendum on gaano kagaling ba tong presidente na to. And that's, at least yung experience natin, that's what made it clear na si Duterte ay napaka-popular because he was able to endorse candidates. And na 12-0 niya yung midterm yun, di ba? Yung last midterm na was
naman, I would say 9-3-0.
Like 9-3-0. Oh, I forget na.
Like Nancy Binay, Grace Poe, one more
Oh,
person.
right. Yeah.
So I would say 9-0.
Pero as good as it gets si Duterte, di ba? So I remember para sa atin yun yung tell na malakas yung presidente. Pero iba kasi sa US kasi sa atin usually pagpapasok sa midterm yung presidente, malakas yung presidente natin. So si Noynoy, malakas may incumbency power sa atin Dito kasi sa US, madaling mainis ang mga tao sa presidente nila. So actually, kabaliktad. Pag pumasok yung US sa midterm, yung presidente sa midterm, ang expectation is yari siya. So the fact na hindi siya nayari dito sa midterm is already telling and is already cause for celebration kay Joe Biden. Now, just to clarify sa mga kameta, that doesn't necessarily mean na panalo sa Senado at saka sa House si Joe Biden. We don't know yet. Right? We don't know yet. The odds are it looks like the Democrats will keep the Senate. Hindi pa sure yun, and the Republicans will take the House. Now on paper, that looks like a loss for the Democrats because they had both, di ba? Pero yung pinag-uusapan natin dito mga kameta is sa US, partida yan Kasi ang expectation, opposite ng Pilipinas, ang expectation is yari yung presidente sa midterm. Just the fact na hindi na yari si Joe Biden is already an overwhelming success for him. And that's why ganito yung tono namin.
Right. Lele, just on 2 points. No? First of all, I think this is where you see the difference in our political culture vis-a-vis Americans. No? Because Americans are very obsessed about making sure power is not too concentrated in the executive branch. That goes back to the American Revolution, the experience with the King George, etc. So because they have a clear two-party system, you know what to do, right? Come the next election cycle, you balance it out to make sure not one party takes over everything like that. No, although Lelo, let me add, there was another difference with these elections because remember, the government is not made of 2 branches, but 3 branches, right?
Yes.
And the judiciary is not looking like a democratic or even a neutral one. It's looking like a Republican judiciary. So I won't be surprised. That was also one element that I didn't see as much emphasized in the analysis of elections. But if I were a liberal or independent American, and I would say like yung Supreme Court ay medyo alanganin na, di ba, with the Roe versus Wade. I'm not sure giving Republicans also the Congress is going to create a balance. I call it the Elon Musk theory, right, of politics. Put the Republicans here, put the Democrats, and everything will be balanced, which just shows how ignorant the guy is when it comes to politics.
So, 2 points din yung response ko dyan. Unang-una, yung term sa US is yung divided government. I think that's what you were doing. Americans love divided government because they don't want one party parang steamrolling the other party. Unless, of course, sobrang makapangyarihan, sobrang popular ng party na yun. Like, 2002 under George W. Bush. Sa Pilipinas, gusto natin na yung presidente is effective. So we want effective governance on the part of the president. So we're likely to elect that president senators para matulungan yung presidente. And that makes it really difficult for the opposition sa Pilipinas because the opposition sa Pilipinas always has to be constructive relative to the president that the public wants to be effective. And sa Pulse Asia, sinasabi lagi ni Ronnie Holmes that the president of the Philippines has immense signaling power. Nasisignal niya kung ano yung issue. So that's why I personally think maybe dapat talaga mag-parliamentary system na yung Pilipinas kasi masyado talaga we vest the president with so much power. Hindi tayo mahilig sa divided governance. Well, that's another issue. Yung second reaction, I think that's a terribly sharp point, Richard, na talagang the reason why the US electorate is willing to give more seats to Democrats than is usual is because assume na nila na kahit ano mangyari, meron kang divided government. Kasi for the foreseeable future, hawak na ng Republican Party yung Supreme Court. Parang sa Pilipinas parang alam naman natin na kahit walang kulay ang mga Supreme Court Justice, nakakampi nila yung kanilang appointing president. Wag na tayong maglokohan, di ba? And dito sa US, the justices of the Supreme Court have made it a lot clearer that recently na kulang na lang, lagyan mo na lang ng R beside their names because they're really Republican justices. Wag na tayong maglokohan na impartial itong mga to. Which brings us to the big issue of this election. Of course, the Supreme Court ruled against Roe versus Wade, overturning decades of legal precedent and making it possible for states across the country to ban abortion. And napakalinaw dito sa election na to that if there was a threat that abortion was going to get banned in a particular state, or if there was a highly anti-abortion candidate, that the Democrats would come out and they would vote against these people. And it's very interesting because na-motivate dito yung mga Democrats na dati hindi ganun ka-democratic. So, for example, yung Biden Electoral Coalition, what the people who really made Biden win were suburban women. Dating suburban women were swing voters, in fact, quite Republican. But because sobrang sexist na ng Republican Party, suburban women have voted for the Democrats. And mukhang this election, dahil nga na-reinforce yung idea na, because anti-abortion yung Republicans na, they're a threat to women, the suburban women came out again. So parang meron ka talagang meron kang emerging new electoral base for the Democrats, this category of suburban women.
Yeah. I remember back in July, because you remember things because jogging in Seoul has its own memory. No, I remember New York Times had a poll back in July and it showed that college-educated whites and suburban women could be the swing in favor of Democrats. So this is before inflation became a big issue. Kaya I always had that at the back of my head. Now, if ever there'll be a surprise, these people will be the surprise ones. So apparently, kasi diba, law and order ang malaking issue sa mga Republicans. And they did a pretty good job in some states of hammering this issue. At saka yung mga suburban, kasi takot din sila, the crime will may infestation from urban to them, diba? But mukhang the culture war that from the right-wing side that is being waged against women's rights, etc. I mean, I'm watching Handmaid's Tale now. No, I mean that's
nakakatakot.
Be serious. Like I'm taking this serious. Like it's like the Taliban version of taking. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not totally impossible, right? I mean, like it's crazy. I mean, some of the culture wars unfolding and all. Yun lang. I mean, I'm just looking at that and the surprising part. By the way, I wanted to also go back to this point. I don't want to give up on Trump's related discussion yet. Trump
masaya to, Brad.
Kasi balikan natin sa Pinas yan, di ba? Si Tatay Digong. I mean, medyo, ano naman si Tatay. No, I mean, speaking of Trump, he was expected to announce his candidacy 3 nights ago, right? And, nothing is going on. What's going on there? Like, medyo sumablay talaga siya. No?
Si paring Trump ready na magkandidato ulit. Kasi ang expectation ng lahat ng tao is malakas ang Republican Party this election. So riding high on that wave, mag-a-announce si Trump na siya pa rin ang head of the Republican Party. I chose a lot of the candidates that won and therefore I'm still electable. Ang problema, yung mga candidates na binak niya, puros talo. Mga talunan yung mga candidate niya.
Including celebrity Mehmet Oz, right? Super Oprah level person, no? Yeah.
We should talk about yung Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania is one of the most interesting states na talagang prove na laos na si Trump. So, for example, yung senador sa Pennsylvania na yung Senate candidate niya sa Pennsylvania, si Mehmet Oz, who's a celebrity, akala mo winnable kasi sikat si Dr. Oz dito Siya yung resident doctor sa Oprah Winfrey Show. Mayaman siya at saka may endorsement siya ni Trump. Tapos yung para sa gobernador, si Doug Mastriano, who was a Stop the Steal candidate. In other words, isa siya dun sa mga nagkakalat ng false idea na nadaya si Trump nung last election. Ginulpi ng pareho.
Parang lalaking mo kauson ng
ginulpi pareho.
Yeah.
And it's really very telling na laos na si Trump. And this is not to discredit, of course, John Fetterman, who was an amazing candidate. We should talk about him also because I think we need John
We have a
Fetterman.
special part just for Fetterman.
Oh,
Don't worry
we
about it.
need John
Trump,
Fetterman.
inaayusin natin tong si Trump. Yeah.
We need John Fetterman kasi John Fetterman isa na naman parang Lula type figure yan eh, di ba?
Yeah, exactly.
He's a very
3 times the
inspiring
size.
figure. So parang mukhang malalaos our orange bodies mukhang nalalaos na. And I find this is going to be interesting for the future of the Republican Party. And yung sinasabi ni Mitch McConnell, who's the Republican leader in the Senate, yung candidate quality matters. Patama kay Trump yun actually eh. So I think magiging marching order talaga ng Republican Party ngayon is candidate quality moving into the presidential election.
Right. Like team crazy out, team sane, normal in, right? And of course, the emerging winner really of these elections, aside from Biden, because he didn't get a shellacking, is DeSantis, right? Governor DeSantis of Florida. He shares, I don't know about his postal code. It must not be too far from Mar-a-Lagos, right? Rich people together, right? So DeSantis could be now the big winner, right? Coming out as essentially the team normal guy, right? I mean, I know he's extreme for a lot of liberals, but by Republican Trumpian standards, he seems to be the version of the Bush, right? Or the more establishment Republican, right?
Oh, I would say, Richard, kasi iba na tong Republican Party na to. Meron ka ng permanent populist.
Right.
Meron ka na talagang permanent populist rhetoric, di ba? Hindi lang naman Trump yan, from the Tea Party revolution onwards, you've really shifted it right on many issues, on many cultural issues. Yeah. And then you've kind of shifted it. People don't talk about this. You've kind of shifted it left a little bit on certain economic issues.
Trade
in the
issue.
Anti-globalization. Yeah. Anti-globalization party na itong Republican Party na to, which was not the Republican Party of Reagan. So you get somebody like Ron DeSantis, like it's not a return to the 1980s. Yeah. And he's not, Mitt Romney. So he's still a populist. And he's still, in many ways, still a nativist. Medyo nakakatakot pa rin yan. I think, marami pa rin racist policies pag naging presidente. And si Ron DeSantis, I think it's going to be very difficult for immigrants like myself in the US. Baka pahirapan pa ako makakuha ng dual citizenship ko or things like that. Pero, he is not as crazy as Trump in the sense na yung outright conspiracy theories about election. Mukhang wala namang ganun. Kasi si Trump is crazy, but what turned him craziest for me was really casting doubt on the integrity of US election. And yun talaga yung permanent damage ni Trump, yung Stop the Steal campaign.
Right. I mean, speaking of DeSantis, I mean, honestly, I don't know if this is going to put me in trouble, but I see him more like an opportunist. I think his populist turn was more like riding the Trumpian wave. Because if you look at him in the past, I don't think he was that crazy. I mean, I have family who have lived in Florida and all. I've been following the Florida politics for quite some time. And my other thing with DeSantis is that if you look at his stance on the abortion issue, he was not going the super crazy position, right? I think I won't use the word moderation, but at least it was not team crazy. So my sense with DeSantis is that to juxtapose himself from Trump, he might recalibrate. I hate it. Parang hirap gamitin yung word na moderate, but he might recalibrate in ways that will make him the more palatable candidate for the center, whatever left of Republican Party. Nonetheless, of course, Lele, one candidate I'm also watching.
COVID din, Richard. Hindi siya isa mga siraulo na parang COVID denialist. Mukhang maayos yung
exactly.
Vaccines, for example, sa Florida.
Right. Not to mention, of course, I'm also looking for other potential stars like J.D. Vance. Because he's the Netflix, but he again another opportunist, right? He was anti-Trump. He only became pro-Trump in the elections, and Trump himself pointed it out. Right, this guy used to be against me just once, and he left. So I don't know. I won't be surprised. J.D. Vance in 2 years kind of tries to pull off an Obama. Yung hindi pa may seat niya sa Senate, next move. He looks like a very I would say ambitious person, and he has a compelling narrative behind him, at least for the debate.
Ito parang mga ka-age natin to mga to si J.D. Vance,
39, right?
Mga halos ka-age lang na mas matanda lang sa atin ng konti si DeSantis eh. Mga aging millennials na ambisyoso. Naku! Makatamaan tayo dyan.
We look younger naman. Sila medyo tatay na.
Hindi naman siguro natin kasing ambisyoso yung mga yan. Ang ambitious lang naman natin ay mga intellectual ambition.
Sana all. No, so anyway, so enough of the Republicans for now. Balikan natin, mami. Alam natin maraming fans sa mga Republicans sa Pilipinas. At yung mga Pilipino natin, mga pamilya dyan sa US, maraming Republicans. So, I don't want to say too much. Baka mama, hindi na ako imbitado dyan.
Hati rin naman, brother. Di ba? I think
Yeah.
60-40 ata ang mga Pilipino sa US eh.
Yeah, or even
60%.
70-30, no? Yeah. Which is...
We're like the Vietnam, that we're mostly kasi ang Asians is usually medyo over 70-30 ang Asian Americans in favor of Democrats. Where it gets closer is I think for Vietnamese and Filipino.
South Vietnamese, yeah. Because
Vietnamese and
communist.
But even in the aggregate yung Vietnamese,
right.
Marami ring anti-communist na North Vietnamese kaya nga sila umalis doon, 'di ba? Kasi ayaw na nila doon sa partido.
Especially in DC area, Virginia, and now let's go to the again Nexus kasi to mga Nexus, no, mga ka-meta. Of course, we're not just gonna talk about French elections or yes elections para lang sabihin namin marami kayong alam sa buhay. That's not the point. The point is anong ambag nito sa Pilipinas. And that's where I want to go to the undeclared star of the show, which is Mr. Fetterman, right? 6'8", goatee, someone who had just a stroke 2-3 months ago, who could barely handle himself through the debate, and yet he flipped Pennsylvania, which has been Republican held for at least a decade, right? So are there lessons there? Because I was listening to an episode of The Daily on New York Times, and how it was talking about how the Democrats were really watching whether Fetterman is the archetype of the future, right? Mm-hmm. Someone who's very progressive, actually Bernie Sanders progressive, not Biden, forget about Hillary Clinton, right? In terms of policy positions, pero yung packaging niya, folksy. Yeah, Harvard Law School graduate, but he went back and became a mayor in some small town in Pennsylvania, had to live with his parents. He has to do, manual work at home. He talks in a very unrefined, on Ivy League way. You get what I'm saying? Of course, the Republicans say it's a show, but it comes up very authentic. So speaking of Fetterman, you said something like he's the Lula of the US, kind of like 3 times the size lang. Ganun ba yan? Half the age, 3 times the size. What's going on there?
Ang laki niya. Oh, sorry, ang laki nga niya. If you
look at Obama. Obama is until his neck lang. The guy
he looks like a pro wrestler, pare.
Yeah. Yung si Undertaker ba yan? Si ano?
Grabe. Tapos I think ang dami I think it's so hard to explain yung Fetterman phenomenon. Kasi meron ding politics, meron ding very Pinoy politics na nangyari doon, yung politics ng damay. Kasi nagka-stroke si Fetterman, di ba? Right. Tapos nung dinibate niya si Dr. Oz, mukha siyang talunan, mukha siyang ginugulpi ni Dr. Oz because he was slurring his words, hindi pa siya gano'ng kagaling, galing niya sa stroke. And people thought na parang, ay, yari na si Fetterman kasi kinawawa siya ni Dr. Oz, panalo si Dr. Oz sa debate. Pero the opposite effect actually happened. Nakirama yung mga tao at umakyat yung donations ni Fetterman. I thought that was a parang very Pinoy phenomenon because there's actually no American word for it. Pero sa Pilipinas, alam natin kung ano yun, damay yun. Nakikiramay sila dun sa nagkasakit.
Underdog. He became like an underdog, no? I mean, like I think it's the underdog effect. Let's just call it that way. Naawa yung mga tao sa kanya and all of that. And I think it's even more when you see a 6'8" giant guy suddenly looking so vulnerable and lost. Parang yung PT factor ay parang times 10, di ba? Emmett Moss with his perfect hair and perfect teeth and perfect English. You know what I'm saying? New Jersey English, by the way. He's really from New Jersey, right? Di ba? I remember they got that girl from Jersey Shore. Di ba? Ano yung reality show na Jersey Shore to say, Emmett Moss, come back home. We need you. That was the best. For me, that was the best way. The trolling was amazing. I really love the Pennsylvania elections. Like you need Jersey Shore girl. Like, Emmett, come back home. Come back home, Ozzy. You know, kind of like. So yeah, that was really something. I'm sorry, Laura.
Sabi ng yung the way you would describe. Okay yun, papanurin ko yung
Yeah, bro, my Jersey Shore girl. Yeah.
Sinasabi ng Pod Save America, yung podcast na run by former Obama staffers, which I recommend if you want to really hear.
I'll check it now,
side. Sabi nila, the advantage of Fetterman was he was strong on the cultural issues that mobilized Democrats. Napaka-strong niya on abortion. Napaka-strong niya on even democracy. Pero he was also strong on economic issues. Economic issues na mukhang, the populists on the left and the right share. Kasi I was listening to his speech. Sabi niya, one of my goals is to really bring back manufacturing to the US. And, take manufacturing away from the Chinese, make sure na stable yung supply chain natin dito sa US. Para hindi tayo reliant sa Chinese at bumalik yung mga trabaho sa atin, yung mga working class jobs sa atin. And he was saying it while dressed up as a laborer himself. Dito sa US, if you wear a Carhartt jacket, parang slight symbol yun na unionista akong manggagawa ako, although medyo hipster na rin siya ngayon. Pero traditionally, yun yung symbol ng Carhartt. So he was wearing a Carhartt jacket. He was saying, let's bring back manufacturing jobs. And actually, that's also something that successful Republican populists are doing. You get somebody like J.C. Vance in Ohio, and he's saying na wala na yung manufacturing jobs dito dahil sa globalization, dahil sa China, and we need to bring that back. So actually, what's interesting here, the first point I want to make about Fetterman is nakuha niya yung populist. He tapped into a populist thread that's popular on the left and the right, and that's why you can, with a candidate like him, you can get split ticket voting in the US. Meaning binoboto siya ng some Republicans who are voting for Republicans in other places because he taps into a populist message that's shared by both parties. And then the next thing for Democrat, he's a sana all kind of candidate, diba? Kasi some Democrats malakas sa economic issues, mahina sa cultural issues. He says there's no tension here. Sana all, kukubrahin ko yan lahat. Yun yung power ni Fetterman, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's the great synthesizer, no? I
like that.
He can put a tough front, at the same time he could get the compassion. He could be quite to the left here, but at the same time look folksy and relatable. Very, very interesting, no? For someone like, and my point is, kasi ganito, bro, like I always argued someone like Jokowi would work in the Philippines, right? Because for me, again, maybe it's a jump, right? Maybe it's quite a jump. But if you look at Jokowi, he kind of is a synthesizer too, no? I mean, there's definitely that element of folksy, populist citing, but he can also be internationalist, talk to the business sector. He can be a good governance guy. At the same time, he can also deal with the right conservative groups, no? So kind of, he doesn't come off as too liberal, too progressive. I don't know. I mean, of course, in the Philippines, you can call that balimbing, no? Or lack of conviction. For me, the balimbings, there's a difference between balimbings and synthesizers. Balimbings are people who just go with the flow, right? They put their thumb in theirs. But the synthesizers are not like that. They know what is their position, but they also know what's the reality, prevailing reality, then find a workable synthesis of the two, right? For me, that's what makes them special, no? So that's how I look at Fetterman. And my point is, siguro sa Pilipinas, we need not only someone, but a group of people, the same way for Democrats, that can have progressive ideals, but speak it in a language that doesn't come off as elitist, as, Ateneo UP law graduate, no offense to anyone, or Harvard Law School graduate. You get what I'm saying? Like someone who has all of those elements together. Obviously, I mean, I've written about Mayor Magalang of Baguio. I've written about Vico Soto, of course, a number of people who come to our mind, who I think kind of approximate the synthesizer archetype I'm looking at. Obviously, it's debatable. It's still early to say. Pero ako kasi I'm looking at the psychology of the voters in many democracies where there's a lot of discontent with dysfunction of democracy, with globalization, with lack of inclusive development. And Tinko, what really people are looking for is not ideological debates per se, but someone they can relate to and someone that speaks to their anxieties, doesn't lecture them, but someone also who's, willing to take a stand sometimes and, be the captain of the ship, no? So maybe I'm making it too much vague here, but I just see that all the successful politicians I'm seeing, from Lula to Fetterman, even to Macron, right? They look so different on the surface. But I think there's certain things these guys are good at doing in terms of, and Jokowi, obviously, this synthesizing ability. No, I mean, which goes back to this favorite quote of mine from Napoleon, which is, he said, my mind is like a set of drawers, and I take out whichever drawer fits the purpose of the moment, or something like that, right? So I don't know. I just always felt this kind of thinking and political mindset could be very, very helpful, especially in moments of uncertainty and moments of doubt. and moments of democratic crisis. Yun lang, maybe I'm pushing it too far.
Alam ko may sagot ka dito, Richard, and nasagot mo na to sa akin in private, but I want our listeners to hear it. Because the argument against the viability of synthesizer in the Philippines is Isko Moreno, because he did try that person. Pero gulpe si Isko. So how are you able to make the argument that we need a synthesizer if the kind of prototype synthesizer in the last election lost by a lot?
Yeah, the Isko case really needs a proper post-mortem analysis. I mean, I'm talking about the candidacy, right? I mean, he's still young. God bless him. No, actually, I hinted at that, right? I wrote something in my Philippine Daily Inquirer discussing why I believe it went wrong. I mean, one reason was it's one thing to synthesize, it's another thing to be all over the place, right? So it's like you cannot be anti-Duterte, then kind of beg for Duterte to endorse you essentially, and then you can say like it was all over the place, and then be anti-Marcos when you know that Marcos is running, but you were a kind of soft peddling on Marshall. That was my problem. Like, so for me, I think there was sloppy execution there. There was sloppy communications there. For me, the fact that Isko was still a top candidate when he entered the race, the fact that many still consider as second most preferred candidate until the 11th hour of the race, and then nag-meltdown na, that says that maybe Isko may not have been the best vessel for that kind of politics. But I think that kind of candidate, archetype candidate, can still work in the Philippines with better strategy, with better timing, with better execution, etc. Now, you may say that, oh, Richard, you're still forcing the point. But ako, we're talking about archetypes, no? So some people can approximate the archetype and sustain it better over a long time than others. Like Duterte was able to be Duterte for 6 straight years, right? Yes. It's not like he was crazy and exciting during elections and then it became boring and standard. No. He sustained it, right? So that explains why he's all. So my thing is, pag you are approximating an archetype, the execution and sustainability of execution is very important. But I agree, Leloy. It's still something I keep on thinking about, and I think we still have to analyze what are the things that really went wrong there as far as the East Coast. For me, naman, Leloy, maybe again, it looks like it's a cop out. But for me, the moment Sara and Marcos came together, it was game over. For
yeah.
Yun lang para sa akin.
Yeah.
Kasi if Sara did not go with Marcos and Sara endorsed Isko, it could have been a very different race. So for me, it's quite short-sighted to see how the race ended, but forgetting 80% of the race, where actually Isko was kind of in a position to be the dark horse, right? But again, as I said, he all over the place, lack of consistency. And isa pang problema kasi nakita ko sa Isko campaign was, parang he wanted to be the kuya ng bayan, which doesn't make you presidentiable, right? Like with the, what's that stand, yung Adidas shoes niya and his like Apple Watch, and like, dude, no. And sabi ko sa kanya, ano ka makinis for president? You're too fresh, right?
Kaya yung ginawa niya yung kanyang rap video, yung pangarap ko
pangarap mo yung mga ganun
na nagsando siya at nakapag-inuman siya, so parang medyo pilit kasi yun nga makinis pa rin kahit anong gawin mo.
Tapos super kuya, di ba, ang dating, parang bata ka pa. In fact, I anecdotally, right, you talk to a lot of people who were for the uni team, right, and you say, what do you think about Isko? Okay naman, pero bata pa, hilaw pa. Sabi ko, hindi yan bata, mas matanda yung kay Sara I don't know ba? Yung mga ganun reaction. I don't know ba? Kaya sabi ko, talagang itong si Isko, he looks too masyado siyang makinis. Yun ang problema sa kanya. He needs to look a little bit more presidential. Kaya sabi ko, magbarong na lang siya all the time. But anyway, for me, that's my riposte, no, Leloy, na he may not have been the best vessel for that archetype, but I think the archetype can still work. And again, I'm looking at the Jokowi case as a very interesting case. Yeah, and I think and kasi ito pang Leloy, no, being an effective politician is one thing. Winning elections is sometimes another thing, right? Sometimes you can bring them together, sometimes you cannot. Because elections are crazy, Lelo. You know, there's so many variables, there's so many imponderables, right, that can sink the best of politicians and political figures, right? So I think the only one I can think of who was able to defy and put it all together was FDR. You know, it's like, how many times did he become president? 3, 4 times. But again, those were extraordinary times. So
it was the moment.
Yeah, yun nga. So obviously there are there are still a lot of proper analysis we have to do about the elections in the Philippines 2016. Yun ang napansin ko, Lele, parang people move on too fast in the Philippines. Like, ako, I'm still interested. I go back to the data. I still want to understand what happened. People just want to move on na 2022.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's sorry, may one reason nga pala bakit
go ahead, Lele.
We want to move on from this last election or are not thinking about this election hard enough. We don't have as much data on the 2022 election in the Philippines as we did for the 2016, for the simple reason na yung 2016, somebody commissioned an exit poll for the election. Kaya ang dami nating data. Ngayon, wala nag-commission ng exit poll. Na kung meron man
yung isang ano tawag doon, isang I don't know how to put it nicely. Yung isang political consultancy firm na nagpapanggap na di ba there's a consultancy firm which also does survey agencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
they had an exit poll. Yeah.
Walang exit poll from at least, our two major established survey organizations. Yung dalawang pinaka-reliable. Yung pinaka-reliable na walang problema sa sampling methodology, mind you, at mas magaling pa rin sa Google Trends. Just since we're
balikan natin. Anong
kasi hindi mo kayang i-Google Trends ang exit poll data, 'di ba, Richard? Kailangan mo pa rin itong mga conventional survey forms. Medyo baduy, it's not snazzy big data online, but it gets the job done. And the problem is nobody commissioned SWS or Pulse Asia to do an exit survey. So hindi pa rin natin alam. Wala talaga tayong magandang datos about this 2022 election as compared
is that our failure as civil society to make sure that the basics of the elections are taken care of, including proper data analysis? I mean, maybe I'm stretching it, pero feeling ko yun ang kakulangan natin. The fact that a lot of our friends were too much into Google Trends to pay attention to real science.
Babalik talaga tayo ng babalik.
Babalikan natin.
Sorry, pero balikan ko lang.
Ayaw bumitaw din yung kapila eh. Joke lang, bigla may.
Pero ano ko lang yung balik ko lang sa I think your wonderful point about Isko Moreno na wag nating sukuan yung model na yun. Kasi ako naniniwala ako that sometimes they're what I would call John the Baptist candidates. Yung they bring the message pero hindi nila ma-home run yung message. But they're telling you that something could happen in the future. For example, sa US, Sarah Palin was the John the Baptist candidate for Trumpism. Talo. Pero a few years after, you get Trump. In Brazil, in many ways, Lula was the John the Baptist to Lula himself. Kasi di ba talunan si Lula. But some people in Brazil were like saying, pwede to eh. This is something we can sure. Yeah. And I think that's a possibility in the Philippines, this kind of like shattering of the old narratives. And I think it's completely possible because ang nangyari sa Pilipinas is we're really becoming polarized. And I think Filipinos don't like polarization as much as the Americans do.
Yes,
kasi sa Americans, kampo-kampo talaga yan eh, parang Democrats and Republicans. Pero one of the advantages of the fact that we don't have an established two-party system and magulo yung party system natin at balimbing ang mga politiko natin is that it is a bit more difficult to have a permanent polarization sa Pilipinas.
Lele, you're the historian here. Yeah, sorry. I want to hammer on this as we enter the final part of our episode. I know marami pa tayong pag-usapan. I want to get back to this because you immediately went for the parliamentary solution, right? Ban 8. And I have issues with that. So I know a lot of people are, who are these people, they keep on trolling me when I say it's not a magic solution na palitan mo lang forma ng gobyerno, iba ng dating. Like sabi nga nung isa, sabi niya, hindi ka maging Michael Jordan kung nakalabas yung dila mo habang nag-shoot. You get what I'm saying, right? Like it takes more than that. So now let me raise this point. We had a two-party system and the contention is the path dependency argument, which is had Marcos not completely demolished the two-party system, which obviously was trapo, right? In the 60s and 50s. Wala tayong defense yan. Trapo talaga, no? Like, it's not like Marcos came out of nowhere and demolished paradise. No. Trapo.
Produkto din siya nun.
Produkto din siya nun. Ang point ko, Lelo, is had that two-party system na sabog pa rin in 50s and 60s, had that been given more chance in the 70s and 80s and 90s don't you think the Philippines would have been at least Taiwan, Korea level in terms of the two-party systems that they have? Maybe not, I don't know, SPD, CDU level or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Na parang, ang tingin ko is, we're giving up on the presidential system too early because the presidential system was never given the real chance to mature. And when I say mature is including a party system, including yung implementation of the vision of a real party system. Not to mention the anti-dynasty bill, lahat ng mga kakulangan ng 1987 Constitution. So let me be absolutely clear. I'm no fan of the 1987 Constitution. God bless the soul of some of our friends who were framers of it. But I even told them, no, you can guess where this came. I said, what were you thinking about when you came about with this Constitution? Ang daming mga problema na nakikita ko dito. There's no automatic laws against anti-dynasty. Ang daming mga restrictions on investments na I'm not sure that was good for the 21st century. It was so anti-Marcos, it forgot the future. It ended up electing another Marcos, right? Like that's the ultimate slap, right? So ikaw, Lela, as an historian, what is your take on this party issue? Because I'm not sure if Filipinos are not kampo-kampo rin. I think we are very kampo-kampo, except it's disorganized, right? While the American ones is a much more organized kampo-kampo along party lines and policy and ideological lines. So ikaw yung historian here, I'm the political scientist here. So I want to ask you as a historian, what is your take on this? Maybe counterfactual masyado, but comparative.
I want to refer to two important works that I think will elucidate this question. The first is yung work of the legal historian Lea Castañeda Anastasio. It's called The Foundation.
You want to project it on the screen? I don't know. Maybe we can make our podcast different because the video version, I think that's the point, right? Yeah, project. Why not? Yeah, let's do that.
Go ahead, Richard. Mas gamay mo to sa akin if you can do it for me, please. It's just called it's called The Foundations of the Modern Philippine State by Lea Castañeda Anastasio. And then si Lea, of course, edited a new book called The Marcos Reader, along with our friend Jojo Abenales. May contribution din ako doon. Pero the point that Lea makes...
Foundations of
the Modern Philippine State.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, yung The Marcos Reader na kalalabas lang sa Ateneo Press na inedit din ni Lea Castañeda Anastasio alongside, my mentor, si Patricio Jojo Abenales.
Right.
And the 2 points that Lea makes the point that Lea makes in these two books is that the reason why the Philippine presidency, both today, to a lesser degree today, but most especially during the two-party system, the Commonwealth period, and also
right. Yeah.
Because the Philippine presidency is not patterned after the presidency of the United States. It's patterned after the colonial governor general of the Philippines. And remember, colonialism is a kind of is an absolutist system, and a kind of system that really places power on a certain group of people. So the fact na colonial governor general yung legal basis ng institution means it is really a more powerful presidency than other presidencies. So that's the first book I want to refer people to. We really need to talk about presidential power in the Philippines, and I think Lea really opens up a great conversation about the extent of presidential power. Second book I want to share with people is yung classic ni Mark Thompson na lagi pa rin binabasa in some political classes, is yung The Anti-Marcos Struggle. And you may think that it's just a book about the Marcos period, pero actually yung opening chapter ni paring Mark Jan is a chapter called The Rules of Pre-Martial Law Philippine Politics, which is, I think, the best description of the two-party system in the 50s and the 60s. And Thompson makes the argument na hindi programmatic yung two-party system na yan, and it would have been very difficult to turn that two-party system programmatic dahil essentially ang nangyayari, bakit nagsiswing yung power from nationalista to liberal and vice versa. Ang nangyayari is kung may nakaupo na presidente, say from the nationalista party, marami siyang spoils na binibigay sa sistema. Pero at one point, mauubusan ka ng spoils. There's not enough money to give away. There are not enough seats to give away. So may mga madidisillusion sa'yo. Lalapit yun ngayon dun sa isang partido. Sasabihin ng isang partido, okay, pag kami nanalo, your turn naman. So kaya nag-flip. And kaya nobody could win until Marcos, no president could win re-election is because the spoils would run out and then the other party would come in. And those were the rules of of pre-martial law politics. Now, of course, there is the possibility na something would happen to break those rules and to turn those two parties programmatic. But what I would want to hear in that counterfactual that you're discussing is what would that have been? I mean, what would that have
a
intervened
strong middle class.
break
Again,
those
I know
rules?
this is
Sort
so
of martial law.
I know this sounds so modernization theory, but my argument is I think the Philippines kept on growing its per capita income, which was barely $500-400 in the 50s, 60s to say $2,000 by the 80s, 90s. I think we would have built a strong enough middle class that would have been open to modernizing our state institutions. And of course, we have a precedence in America, which is a progressive era, which modernized the super sabog American political system. Remember, President Garfield was assassinated by someone who just didn't get his position in the French embassy of America, right? Like super trapo politics. If you watch Boardwalk Empire, right, or Gangs of New York, my goodness, I mean, you think we are corrupt like next level in US? No, this is the, this is the age of, Robert Barron. I mean, this is the Gilded Age of America, which is very similar to what we have in the Philippines in recent decades. So my sense is, if America was able to come out of that, of course, you can say America had many advantages, but given that, but if America could come out of that, if many of our neighbors were completely authoritarian, could come out with a much more stable two-party system like Korea, Taiwan, I'm not ruling out the possibility that if even that fragile political system had more chance to build a stable enough economy over 2-3 decades, I think they would have been strong enough. Because the numbers that really got my attention, I don't know if this is the Abinales book, Philippine State and Society, or whereby I saw like by the, this is Benedict Anderson, Kasikat Democracy, whereby the idea is by the late 60s and all, this is Marcos time na, ang laki nung jump na dun sa number of Filipino middle class and professionals going to America. Bago pa ito dun sa Middle East phenomenon ng OFW, no? So we were hemorrhaging middle class very much in the 60s and 70s. So by the 80s, ang liit na ng middle class ng Philippines. And we know, and this is where I'm doing a correction to the modernization theory. We know that when the middle class is small, as we saw in Chile, in Turkey, in Thailand, they become much more reactionary because there's a fear that the progressive populists from the left will squeeze them out. So they tend to side more with conservative candidates. We saw that in Chile. And this is the whole thesis and PhD dissertation of Walden Bellew, right? In Chile back in the day. So my contention stands. I think if the middle had given the chance, even that sabog two-party system would have grown into something more reasonable. And okay, that's one argument I can make. And I'm sure you can still pick a lot of holes in it. I can do it myself. But
susugan ko yun. Pwede ko ba susugan before
But my second argument would be this, bro. What is the assurance that the parliamentary system could do a better job in bringing about and non-spoils? That's my point. It's like, okay, tanggapin ko na talagang the counterfactual. There's so many holes in that argument. I'm going to say it myself, right? I'm just entertaining the argument. We're both debaters, so we can do that, right? Like what did Fitzgerald said, right? A sound mind can think two opposite ideas and still stay sane, right? We're doing that. But parliamentary, like what is our assurance that the parliamentary system, not assurance, probability, right? That the parliamentary system would do a better job in rearing a real political party system in the Philippines.
Yeah. Susugan ko yung Richard yung point mo about for lack of a better term, modernization. Although the road is much more complex than that, diba? So wag nyo kaming yariin dahil ginamit namin yung word na modernization.
Which we know, akin talaga tayo.
Nuance naman namin. Pero one of my other favorite counterfactuals is, kasi nung 1965, dyan nagsimula talaga pumasok yung first generation, starting with, I think, Placido Mapa, na may from Harvard, economics in Harvard. Kasi naniniwala naman ako na maraming mamagagaling na ekonomista at sometimes economic expertise is quite necessary. So in the 60s in the 60s, diyan talaga nagsimulang pumasok yung mga ekonomista natin na magagaling. Kasi actually in the 1950s, ang mga ekonomista mo is medyo bulok. One of the reasons why I hated the Central Bank of the 1950s, because it was being run by a conservative lawyer who actually learned his central banking from very conservative Americans in the Philippine National Bank when he was a lawyer for the Philippine National Bank. This is the history of my most detested character in Philippine economic history, si Miguel Cuaderno. I really hate the guy.
Pero pinabalikan mo talaga eh.
Pero yung Pero from 1965 onwards or 60s onwards, you get na nagtitrickle in na yung mga magagaling na ekonomista na meron na talagang professional training. So you get people like Placido Mapa, and then shortly after you get na yung generation ni Virata, and then si Sikat, ganyan. So ang tanong ko is, what would have happened? They had arrived on the scene and they were not forced to serve a dictator.
Okay.
Right? That's
not a counterfactual.
Kasi this might be one of the most this might be, and then of course the UP School of Economics is founded in 1965. So 60s were really, and then Pepe Encarnacion, right? So we're starting to get the most brilliant economists coming back to the Philippines. And this is a kind of new phenomenon, the professionalization of economics in the Philippines. And my counterfactual nga is, ang gagaling ni Tomato. What would have happened if they had not been forced to serve a dictator? I don't know.
Alone, right, Lela? I'll push you on this again. There were not, of course, we had the Berkeley boys back in Indonesia, no? They're also advising
Berkeley.
Yeah. So we also had this. Sorry, to drag in your university, but say there's the Harvard boys, but Berkeley. No, but going back to this, I see your point on the parang a new generation of technocrats, including technocrats in the Philippines who were not trained abroad. Remember the guy who was behind the decision of Asian Development Bank being established in the Philippines, right? What's his name again? But you know what I'm talking about. He was also an American. Remember the ADB Philippines was just one of the candidates. One was, I think, Seoul, Tokyo, and Tehran, right? And eventually they chose Manila. The trade secretary under Macapagal was the key figure behind that. I just forgot the name. Yeah, but I would put him in the same category of this technocratic, patriotic people who could have been our own version of MITI, no? Yung Ministry of International Trade and Industry, etc. Well, ang akin lang naman, di ba medyo neoliberal yung mga ibang, but I don't want to go down that road. But my other thing is like, so you're saying if we were parliamentary, those technocrats could have been prime ministers themselves?
Hindi ko alam kung parliamentary.
Gusto kong balikan yung parliamentary issue mo. So parang
mas basic pa doon yung observation ko. What if it was the same two-party system?
And then
what if they were serving a kind of trapo but democratic president?
And Marcos. Aquino was the president after Marcos' terms ended, right? So mid-1970s, early mid-70s, transition from Marcos to Ninoy, right? Because Ninoy used to seem like the most rational one. And Ninoy was a journalist too. So medyo may alam siya sa mundo, right? So he's not going to be shocked by the economist. He's smart, right? So maybe it could have worked.
And these economists, these economists would have joined the government, I think, regardless of who the president.
Because they want to be close to.
Kasi ang economists a lot of these policy level economists, they think of themselves as public servants, di ba? Kaya sometimes ako rin ito yung problema pag sinisingil natin yung mga ekonomista. It's very common on the left, right? Sisingilin mo yung ekonomista for collaboration, right, with a particular regime kung ayaw mo. But the thing is, iba yung conception ng public service for economists. They think of, I mean, you can critique this mindset, but they think of their role as kind of apolitical, and their goal is to right the ship. And yung thinking niya is, kung wala ako, it would have been a lot worse, right? This applies to economists of different
diplomats. To diplomats too, right? Diplomats also the same. Like Romulo, why did he stay all the way to Marcos?
So kung President si Ninoy Aquino, my suspicion is we would have seen the same talented cast of characters, except the left wouldn't have hated them as much historically. That's my suspicion. Yeah.
They ended up serving the wrong master. Yeah, they were just unlucky they ended up serving. That's an interesting one. Thank you, Lelo. I'm sure you're gonna have a long day ahead of you. I really enjoyed this.
Ako rin.
I didn't expect na yung magkakaroon ng ganyan turn itong discussion natin. So in a way, I don't regret na our Nexus episode, third episode this week was a little bit later than usual. Obviously, dun sa mga kamenta natin, don't worry, I'm gonna set up separately Nexus natin on podcast and different platforms. We're just hoping to generate some momentum, right? And get more traction before, this Nexus, no? Ay magna-next level na. But I'm very, very happy and confident dun sa 3 episodes pa lang natin. Wow, Lelo, like we discussed a lot. Lelo, I'll be very honest about it. And I'm gonna already give a, how should I put it? Teaser. My really hope down the road is we do what they do in the US and all in terms of, put thinkers together in a big place and with audience and all, and really make it exciting and all. I don't want to use the word, I don't want to cite Jordan Peterson, but my point is like we can do the progressive, exciting, cool version of what those guys are doing. I think there's an audience for that. I can see that for myself. So I hope, Lelo, down the road we can do those live events. Let's call it live show. Live show. That sounded so wrong. Okay, let's do live events. People who completely disagree with us, right? Or people who may not share our point of views, including with Google Trends friends. I love to discuss inflation, monetary policy.
Wait, Richard, sinasara mo na yung discussion na maaga. Meron pa akong tanong sa'yo.
Yeah,
so what are you thinking about this week?
What do you mean this week?
What have you been thinking about this week?
Oh, what I've been thinking about? Oh my God. Yeah, geez. So much, bro. No. Ako kasi, bro, of course, you know me, I'm all over the place. So I'm going to give already a preview of what we're going to discuss in next episode, God willing, which is the ASEAN, right? And Biden, China, US, those things are exciting me very much. I'm writing on them. So as a journalist, I have to cover those things. But the other thing I'm thinking also about is, like, maybe there's hope, right? Like after the midterm, like if Joe Biden keeps on defying the odds, who knows, right? I mean, like, who knows? And suddenly I'm excited for 2024 elections in the US. Like, it looks like Biden is going to run. Let's see what's going to happen. So, medyo ganun. Sorry, it sounded muddled. But I really want to talk. And next episode, bro, if you can talk also about your article on wine and things like that, right? Let's do that too. Ikaw, bro, what have you been thinking about aside from elections?
Ako thinking about what I've been thinking about this week is this week kasi, bro, yung sa class namin, there's a very basic jiu-jitsu class for absolute beginner, and then merong mas intermediate. Na-upgrade na ako. Wala pa akong stripe on my belt or anything, pero na-upgrade ako sa intermediate class this week.
Good.
And so I've been learning it a bit more in depth, and man, iba pala to learn a combat sport when you're an adult and just kind of like aspiring towards what you can, kasi like, I'm old, but if I stick to it, I could be black belt by the time I'm 50, ganyan. So meron pa rin growth.
By your mid-40s.
And it's mental growth for sure, kasi it's such an intellect, para pala siyang chess. Oh, kasi pag may ginawang sasagot ka, ganun. And it's I think it's more than the physical activity. It's been good for me.
Bro, nakaka-inggit ka bigla. Parang, kasi in my gym here, there's a jiu-jitsu. And by the way, some of the people they're training there, I saw them with black belts. And I said, my black belts are Philippines. And then the guy coach said, Asian Games champion yan. And then I just got to know we have a world champion who just won, I think, in Abu Dhabi, na Filipina in jiu-jitsu.
Wow.
So this is arriving, bro. We have world champions now. I'm very, very proud of that. And for me, you're absolutely right. Jiu-jitsu is the most intellectual, technical sports out there, right? So I think for our personalities, obsessive personalities, medyo delikado yan. Make sure you don't get addicted, because I know a story from a friend who does martial arts. He's actually based in Singapore. He's in my kind of line of work, IR, international relations. He was talking about like how people get addicted to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so much so that they cannot stop. I'm already telling you this, no? So remember, one concern with wrestling, with grappling sports is staph infection, no? Because some people don't do the proper hygiene and all of that. So they go, may wound yung isa dahil may sapak, may ganon, staph infection. Now, there's this guy, jiu-jitsu champion right now. I forgot his name, but he's relatively young. He keeps on getting staph infection, right? But he doesn't take a break. So what does he do? He keeps on taking
other people.
No, antibiotics.
Oh my God.
So now he cannot eat anything. He's probably in his 30s only. He just completely gutted out his gut. So that's obsession. Like, you see how it attracts very obsessive people, so much so that these people are willing to let go of their body just to perfect art. So I'm not discouraging you. I'm just saying, bro, you're not entering just a fun sport. It's very addictive. So, there's a reason why the Ashton Kutchers and, the Anthony Bourdens and all of these people are getting into this hardcore. So good luck with that, bro. I hope
to. Let's see how far the rabbit hole goes. And thank you for the warning.
Kailan pala yung bro? Yung Thanksgiving.
Next week.
Next week. Okay, so advanced Thanksgiving. Still work. So just the teaser. Hopefully, we'll discuss more post-coloniality. Your great book on post-colony and touch natin sa ASEAN. No, I think that's very important. I want to talk about more Mafilindo, more Malayan world.
Nice.
Not only Philippines but Philippines and our neighbors. No, and so hindi lang yung ganun no. Kaya nga I kind of threw Jokowi into conversation because yeah, and in the coming weeks I'll be across ASEAN and Southeast Asia, God willing, to also cover what's happening and all. So so I'll be joining you from hopefully different parts and discussing the region and all. Thank you very much, bro.
Maraming salamat.
And
Bye-bye.
talk to you soon.
See you.